Tonight is someone at the forefront of that effort, holding the Chinese accountable. That is Congressman Jim Banks, a member of the House Armed Services, Education, and Veterans Affairs Committees. He has introduced a resolution condemning China, also demanding reparations from China for the untold damage and loss of life that they have caused. Congressman, great to have you with us. Let's start with, I'd like to start with $3.7 million that the National Institutes of Health are giving a virology laboratory, a government virology laboratory in Wuhan, China.
That's a great place to start, Lou, and my constituents are demanding answers to that. And as it becomes more and more clear that while China took our jobs, they've given us this virus in return, they should be held accountable for doing such. My constituents are demanding that I go to Washington and fight to hold China accountable. We've looked into ways to do that. Every day you're hearing more and more politicians talk about holding China accountable. How can we do it? Well, one way that we can do it is to submit China to an international court of justice through the UN and explore all of the violations that China has made dating back to the 2005 international health regulations that China, the U.S., and over 100 countries signed on to. These health regulations, Lou, were specifically designed to stop the spread of a pandemic. And China has violated so many of those regulations that there is an open door, an avenue through the UN that Secretary of State Pompeo and Attorney General Barr can go to the UN and demand that China be submitted to this International Court of Justice. Now, we know that China probably will veto that. They'll reject that opportunity. But Articles 49 through 51 of the UN lay out a series of repercussions that the United States and other countries can take if China refuses to submit themselves to that, like preventing flights to and from China, or blocking China into the WTO, or even broadcasting Western media into mainland China or Taiwan. Those are specific ramifications that are laid out within those articles. The United States should take advantage of that and hold China accountable by submitting them to an international court of justice.
Well, there's no shortage of evidence that the Chinese are trying to cover up their role in as the origin of this virus and this deadly pandemic they unleashed on the world. There is no shortage of evidence that they continue to steal our intellectual property. There is no shortage of evidence that they intend to continue their expansive, and that's the nicest word for it, hegemonic ambitions, whether it be in the South China Sea or in Africa or around almost any continent in this world. I mean, there's just no doubt about what they're doing. I don't see any way in which it could be handled diplomatically. I don't see any way in which it could be handled legalistically, because frankly, Congressman, they obviously don't give a damn about our laws or anyone else's.
There's no question about it, Lou. You nailed it. But these are opportunities that we have in front of us that we can take advantage of. Now, you and I both agree the UN isn't worth much, but this is an opportunity for them to redeem themselves as a legitimate international organization by doing what it was intended to do. And going back to these 2005 international health regulations, let's enforce them and let's expose what China and where China violated those regulations and allowing this pandemic to spread and lying about it all the while in a way that will embarrass China on the international scene. We know that other countries like India and Spain want to join us in those efforts. We should welcome that support, and Secretary of State Pompeo and Attorney General Barr have one powerful avenue to do exactly that.
Yeah, I love the fact that the Secretary of State informed the Governors Association that he was keenly aware of which among them was considered friendly, these governors, and by name, are in some cases ambiguous, their views unknown to China, or in fact hardliners, as the Chinese put it, willing to resist them. We've reached a point in this country where we now can triangulate very clearly where the positions are on China, whether it's trade, whether it is their geopolitical ambitions, whether it is their efforts to surveil and carry out espionage in this country, and line up those names with the governors who are pro-China. and to what degree. We don't know to what degree they have, if at all, compromised their states or this country. But now we have some clear abilities to do so, including, by the way, the lobbying groups in Washington, whether it's the Chamber of Commerce, the Business Roundtable, Wall Street, the Securities Association. We have wonderful ways to know exactly who is supporting this president and this president's interest, as well as the nation's, versus those of Beijing and the CCP.
He's the first president in my lifetime, Lou, that's been tough on China in any way. Every other president in my lifetime has sought to appease China. And as you mentioned, as Secretary of State Pompeo made very clear, that the Chinese government labels all politicians on a scale of whether or not they're friendly or whether or not they're hawkish toward China. And the American people, especially my constituents in Indiana, they're paying attention to those elected officials who are far too friendly to China, who have led us down this path, this perilous path that we've been on for far too long, that has allowed China to take advantage of the United States in the way that it has and to unleash this pandemic on the U.S. and the rest of the world. They should be held accountable for it. We've laid out some avenues where we can make China pay for this pandemic instead of the American taxpayers, instead of my daughter's generation who's going to shoulder the debt and the volume of national debt that's piling up by the day to pay for the pandemic. China should be paying for that, not my daughters, who are all three under the age of 10. Their generation shouldn't be paying for that. China should be paying for that instead.
Yes, as you say, neither your daughters nor mine or anyone's children should have to be paying for that. This is a matter, the number, $1 trillion, I know that you've discussed that. $1 trillion in reparations, perhaps just simply be confiscatory, to say the very least, but it would be reparations. I can't wait to see how it all works out. But one thing I do know is people are getting a very clear-eyed view of what China is, what it stands for, and what it means to do. Congressman Jim Banks, you're a big part of the reason that that's the case. We appreciate you being with us. Thank you.